you're leading a $67 billion business. Does that feel intimidating a little bit?
It's kind of nuts, yeah.
I mean, it's massive.
Sometimes when people are resistant to coaching, it's because you're fearful that you're not enough. You assume people don't have good intent.
Was there ever a time when you were getting feedback and you were saying, this is BS?
I've always been one of those people that seeks feedbacks. And I think if you can be open-minded to the fact that someone is seeing something differently than you do, there's always a learning there.
Are there some employees who are not coachable?
It's a great little challenge, but I try to make it my responsibility to find the way.
And how do you do that?
I always try to put myself in the other person's shoes.
Can it ever backfire, authenticity?
Yes, and I'm still willing to take the chance though.
Yeah, you can't live your life based on fear, right?
I just think it's the right thing to do. And you have to remember that generally as leaders, you have a bigger appetite for change than most people do.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining another episode of Great Leadership. Used to be called Leading the Future of Work, recently changed the name, so hopefully everyone is aware of that. And my guest today is Deb Cupp. She is the president of Microsoft North America, board member at Ralph Lauren and Avanade, and leading a $67 billion business. She's also one of the CEOs that I interviewed for my upcoming book, Leading with Vulnerability. Deb, thank you for joining me.
I am so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So does it sound weird to say that you're leading a $67 billion business? Like that, if I had to say that, I would freak out a little bit.
Well, it sounds, I don't know if you saw me sort of smiling when you said it. It's still something that when my mom, I gauge everything the way my mom reacts to it, right? So she'll be like, wait, what? Like it's if you had thought that, 30 years ago, no, yeah, it's kind of nuts. Yeah.
I mean, it's massive. Like there's some people out there who say, I run like a $20 million business, $50 million, $1 million, $67 billion. I mean, even the division of Microsoft North America that you're responsible for is larger than like 99% of just global organizames. Does that feel intimidating a little bit?
You know what? It's funny. I think when I first stepped into the role, I think for sure you're kind of like, whoa, like it's big. And I think part of it is more the responsibility, the fact that you have an accountability to all the people in that business in addition to your shareholders. So I think there's a little bit of that, thinking like, wow, okay, like this is material and, I have an important job to go do to take care of a lot of people and take care of the company. But as time goes on, you sort of, it sounds weird, but you don't really focus on it. I don't think about it that way. I just think about it in the context of the work that we have to do every day and the customers that we serve and the people that we support here. So that's sort of how I get my head around it.
And by the way, for people who are listening and not watching this, you're missing the fact that Deb and I have unplanned matching colored shirts. So if you watch it on YouTube, you'll be able to see that. But if not...
Yeah, we did not plan that. Yeah.
Nice turquoise colors. So today I really wanted to frame the conversation around this idea of coaching and having a coaching mindset, not just if you're a leader, but I also think that if you are not a leader, you probably also need to have a coachable mindset where you accept that people can coach you.
Yes.
Before we jump into a lot of that, I thought we could go back early on in your career and you could share a little bit about the first job that you had and what your journey was like to becoming the CEO of one of the world's largest organizations.
So I'll try not to bore you with a big, long story here. So my first corporate job actually was right out of college. So I worked for a company called Benchmark Systems, and we sold medical software and medical forms. What's that? Sorry.
Is it still around?
Oh, it is not still around. So it was a family-run business, which was interesting, by the way. So that's a fun experience to see what it's like to be working in a family business and then moving into more of what I would consider what was a public company. So I was there for about a year and a half. And it was just literally like cold calling, like working the streets, working the phones, selling to any hospital or medical practice in the area. And I lived down in Virginia. I went to school in Virginia and I lived in that area. And then I went from there to a company called Standard Register, and I was there for 17 years. So I did all sorts of things inside of Standard Register. That company is also not still around. It is now Taylor Communications. So it was bought by a company called Taylor Communications. And I really grew up there. I mean, the best part about that company was, I remember, I think I had my first P&L when I was like 27. I mean, we had so much empowerment to really learn how to run a business. It was amazing. So I was there. I was in sales roles. I was in large deal selling roles. And then I moved into management roles. And then we moved into, it was my first experience with verticalizing businesses. So we ran sort of a geo based model. And then we moved into a vertical based model. And that's sort of where I fell in love with the healthcare space. So I managed the healthcare business there for quite some time. And then I went from there after 17 years in lots of different roles with lots of amazing mentors and peers and people I still talk to today. I went from there to SAP. And I was at SAP for 6 years, and I ran SAP's regulated businesses in the US, and then did that for about three. And then SAP made a lot of cloud acquisitions. And for my final 3 years, I was running the SuccessFactors business in North America. And that was an HR software business. And that was so fun because it was kind of a traditional enterprise software company and a Silicon Valley cloud company coming together, which is very different cultures. And I had been at SAP long enough to understand SAP, but not too long that the folks on the other side would be like, oh no, we don't want this long-termer. So it was such a cool match of cultures, and being able to lead that organization collectively together was great, great fun. So I did that for about 3 years, and then I went to Microsoft. So I've been at Microsoft now for almost 5.5 years. And I started in a worldwide business. So I looked over what we call our enterprise customers at Microsoft, which is our large customer segment. And then I ran with our enterprise business also our industry segment. So I was responsible for looking at our priority industries that we serve at Microsoft and how do we serve those industries specifically differently. You know, if you're a manufacturing customer versus a healthcare customer versus a retail customer, as an example. So I did that, and then it's been almost 2 years that I've been in this role. So I took over as president of the U.S., and then we moved that into North America. So as of now, I run North America. So that's the abbreviated version of all the things that I've done across the journey in the last, however many years that is. Pretty many, I guess.
So it seems like a pretty interesting journey. And when you even think back early on in your career, did coaching play a role for you as far as you being coached by the leaders that you worked with?
Always. And, I was an athlete growing up. I played Division I sports. And so I feel like I have coaching just ingrained in my DNA, both from the standpoint of being coached in addition to coaching. And so,
Yeah.
yes, I think for me, I've always been one of those people that seeks feedback. So I was always interested in learning from both bosses and peers. I think to your earlier point, coaching comes from all sides, right? So I think the opportunity for all of us to be great coaches and to be coached is there.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe the coachable mindset that you need to have, because
Yeah.
as a maybe an entry or a junior level employee, I mean, we keep hearing about coaching all the time in the business
Yeah.
world, and
Yeah.
we'll talk in a few minutes around what it means as a leader to coach people. But I don't think enough gets talked about that you also need to have a coachable mindset, because if you have a leader who's trying to coach you and mentor you and you don't have that mindset of accepting feedback, understanding that you need help, being open to receiving it, then it kind of falls on deaf ears.
Yes.
And it's, especially the more senior you become, the harder it is to have that mindset.
Yes.
So early on in your career, were you always open to being coached, or was there ever a time when you were getting feedback and you were saying, this is BS. Like, why is this person telling me this? I know what I'm doing. Get off my back. Like, how do you embrace the feedback that you're getting?
I think it's funny. I've thought about this a lot because you have experiences both with trying to coach people who may not love it, in addition to receiving coaching. And I think for me, it comes to the place of always trying to improve in what you're doing. And it's always coming from a different point of view. So even early in your career, when you're like, I know that, like they're telling me something, I'm good at this. I don't need any help. Like, look at all the success I've had. There's a different perspective. And I think if you can be open-minded to the fact that someone is seeing something differently than you do, there's always a learning there. And I think that's incredibly valuable. So the biggest part to me about having a mindset to be coached is to be vulnerable. You have to be open to consider the fact that perhaps there's a space that you have an area to grow. You might be great. You might be really, really good. Do you want to be great? So it's that opportunity to continue to raise the bar for yourself. And I embrace that. So I think not everybody embraces that, but I think if you change your mindset around how and why you're getting coached, I think there's something there all the time, even if you don't necessarily agree with all of it. You look for the things you do think can help you.
If only somebody out there was writing a book on leading with vulnerability. If, if
Wouldn't that be the
only
idea?
if only such a resource existed
Yay.
that was coming out October of this year.
I was gonna ask you when it was coming out. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, it's coming out October. So I love that you mentioned that and this idea of being vulnerable and coaching, and I've also had that situation too where sometimes people have tried to give me feedback early on in my career and it just didn't resonate. It didn't connect with me in the right way. Maybe it was how it was being delivered. Maybe it felt more
Could
like
be, yeah.
criticism instead
Yep.
of coaching.
Yep.
So for you as an employee to develop a
Mhm.
mindset where you can be coached, how do you develop that? Like,
Yeah.
how do you show up to work each day being comfortable, being vulnerable, being open to receiving that feedback? I mean, you have a lot of employees you work with.
Yeah.
Do you ever see employees who are being coached by others and it's just not connecting? They're just not
Yeah.
seeing it. I mean, I struggle with this sometimes too.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and I'll just think about it from my own point of view. Is like I think you got to check fear at the door. So I think sometimes when people are resistant to coaching, it's because you're fearful that you're not enough,
Yeah.
and you assume people don't have good intent. So I always kind of one big principle for me is assume good intent. Assume that people are coaching because they're trying to help you. They're not coaching to criticize. They're not coaching to make you feel bad. They're coaching to help. So I think assume good intent, check fear at the door. It's okay if you aren't the best at everything. If there's even people who are the best athletes in the world get coached every single day. So I
Yeah.
think if you take a different frame on it, it allows you to be a little more open-minded. And look, maybe not every single thing that's said to you is really gonna resonate, and that's okay too. But I think if you look at it from the context of saying, maybe I'll get one thing that will help me better my game, will help me show up differently, will help me be more successful in whatever capacity you're trying to be successful. I think it's worth it. So I think
Yeah.
part of it is just feel okay that it's got to be a safe space. And I think that's something managers need to really work on, is that they're creating the right space for coaching to be heard.
And how do you do that?
Yeah, I think for me, and my hope is for many, is that I always try to put myself in the other person's shoes. So if I see something and I want to coach somebody on it, I think about it in the context of how would I want to receive that information. And you have to know the people. So I think the thing about coaching is it is a people first thing. So understand people. People don't generally like to be coached in front of others. People don't generally like to be coached in a way that feels like it's a criticism. It needs to be coached in a way or couched in a way that feels like you're trying to benefit them. So I often think about it in scenarios. People also don't like to be coached in ways that are not specific. Coaching that's not specific is incredibly unhelpful, because I think that actually leaves people with, like, I don't know what to do with that information. It's not specific enough for me to action. So I always think of it as the receiver, and how would I want to receive that coaching, and know the person. I have a guy that used to work for me, and it got kind of fun where we would be like, are you in a place where you can hear it? And he would say like, nope. I go, okay, we'll do it. We'll talk about it next time. So I think just that open, honest kind of dialogue with people gives them the safe place to actually receive it, and in a mindset when they're ready to.
Hey, really quick, sorry to interrupt you, but did you know that 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed? Do me a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can get notified when more videos just like this one are released. And now, let's get back to the content. When you say specific, and I also see this as a big mistake, and sometimes I've even made this mistake with people on my team as well, where there's some feedback or some kind of coaching that you want to give, but you realize it ends up being just, oh, do this better. Or, can you improve upon this?
Yes.
And then the other person is just left with this thing of like, what do you mean like better? What does improve upon actually mean? Yeah. So, but it's very different is if you go back to that person and say, hey, can you, I don't know. You would actually probably have a good example. So what's a specific example of
So I would say a great example might be in our world, like if you're talking about a particular product capability, and let's say perhaps that the person is describing it in a way that the customer isn't quite understanding it, and perhaps it's not a technical buyer. Let's use that as an example. So a great coaching opportunity would be to say, you know that product cold. Like there, it was really clear that you're
Yeah.
deep technically, but the customer isn't as technical as you. So let's think about how we put
Mm.
that concept in a story or an actual business outcome so the customer can connect with it. So it's a great way to say, instead of talking about it in the context of a technical capability, talk about it from the standpoint of an outcome that technology provides.
Yeah.
And then depending on the industry, you can provide an example. So that's a good one because that's a real one. Like that tends to happen when you have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
technical product where
And,
people might be over the customer's head in some cases.
and I actually thought of one on my team as well. I have somebody who's really into technology and AI and just kind of playing around with different AI tools and coming up with ways that we as a business might be able to use it. And sometimes he'll create these tools and send them over to me, and he'll just say, "Hey, I made this tool," and I'll just be left with this like, "Well,
What
what
do
is
I
it?
do?
What? Yeah, like I don't understand." Because he's very technical and I'm not. And
Yes.
so there used to be a time where before I would just say, "Can you explain this?" And he would say, "Well, explain, like, what do you mean?" And so now I'm very specific and I try to coach him and I say, "Look, I love that you're creating these types of tools, but when you create them, here are some very specific questions that I need you to help me answer. What does this tool
Perfect.
do? Why are we
Yes.
using it? How can it be implemented? Are there situations when I won't want to be using it?" And so when I get very specific with that, then he creates these tutorials that answers all the questions and it's very clear. And so I think that it can really be a game changer when you as a
Yeah.
leader are trying to coach people to give them very specific feedback.
And I think timing matters a lot too. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes people wait too long and then they tend to forget exactly what it was about that moment that they wanted to coach and then that it gets jarbled. So I think the
Yeah.
other thing I always try to do is do it as much as you can close to the experience that you saw or had so that they can create that connection too. I think that
Hmm.
helps also.
Are there some employees who are not coachable? Have you ever had somebody that
Well,
you've worked with and you're like, you know what? Nothing I tell you is landing. Like it's just not registering. I have tried everything. Like we are done here.
well, it's funny. I this the same person I mentioned to you where I said, "Is this a good time? You know, is this are you in that headspace?" I will say that person in my career, I had a very hard time getting anything to land, and so I immediately didn't make it about them. I made it about me. So I was
Mm.
like, I'm doing is not resonating. Like, how do I change this up so that I can create a space that they'll hopefully hear what I'm saying, and perhaps we can create some better outcomes for it. So that was a journey, though. I will say it did not happen overnight. It was something that I actually invested a good amount of time in to say, help me understand how I can help you.
Yeah.
My only job is to make sure that I do everything I can to make you as good as you can possibly be. And there's so much greatness in there. And there's just things that I know if we tweak them a little bit, that greatness is just going to continue. So, how do I know when you're open to hearing coaching and feedback? And so it got them to sort of talk through what was a good space for them, how they would receive it. And that person specifically, back to you have to know the people, wasn't somebody who could take it and react. They had to go away with it. And then they would come back and they'd be like, you know what? I thought about it. And it would take them a couple days to sort of absorb. And then we'd have an open conversation about it. So we made actually tremendous progress. So I think that it takes a lot. Some people, it takes a lot of work just to get them to, again, that space where they're free to hear
Yeah.
and they're willing to kind of open their minds. So it's work. I think sometimes there's probably some people out there who will never hear it. But I try to make it my responsibility first and foremost to find the way.
Okay.
It's a great little challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
You kind of challenge yourself to figure out like, I know I know they want to get better. How do I help them?
I wanted to share. So in my previous book, The Future Leader, one of the skills that I had in the book was the skill of the coach, and I wanted to share how I think about coaching, and you tell me if
Yeah.
it resonates with the way that you think about it.
Yeah.
So the challenging thing that I've come across, and I don't know if you've seen this with some of your leaders, is that a lot of people think that that coaching means you make somebody better. But the truth is
Mhm.
you could spend like a minute with somebody and make them a little bit better. Like just teach them one tiny thing, they're a tiny bit
Mhm.
better, and then you could say, "Oh, I've coached them." And the way that I've started to think about it over the past few years is that really the skill of the coach, the mindset of the coach is about helping make other people even better than you are. Because
Oh,
that's what
totally.
requires a lot of time and effort and energy and dedication and focus. And if leaders show up to work each day believing that their responsibility is to make other people around them better even than they are, I think
Yep.
that is a very, very different way to think about it. Does that does that way of thinking about coaching resonate with you?
I love it. And I think I even think about that when I'm hiring people. So for me, I am very aware of surrounding myself or building teams that I think have tons of potential to be better than I am. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of the whole point, right? That you really want to leave a place or a job or a role way better off than it started. And that has to be with someone else who can step into that role and do it better than you ever could. So I actually love that. And I think it also helps people think about, and back to the people who may not be as coachable, you can't do that with everybody. So I think the reality is there's both that deep coaching that to me is what you described.
Yeah.
And then there is some tactical coaching that will occur as people are just performing their tasks or their role. But I think if you're going to go deep, it's that opportunity to see people just reach like incredible potential. And
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that's to me what is like the biggest joy of my job, actually, is what you just described.
Is there a difference between just giving feedback versus coaching somebody? Because, there are a lot of, for example, training programs around coaching. There's methodologies around coaching. Like it's a very specific discipline. And oftentimes we clump in together giving feedback with coaching, with mentoring. How do you define coaching? Like as a leader, what does coaching somebody actually mean?
Yeah. I think for me, coaching is a lot deeper. So I think coaching is something that is, you're really sort of absorbing the individual and the work and the behaviors and the potential. I think feedback can be super tactical and specific and direct. That kind of the example I gave before around, there's something very specific a person was doing. You can provide them feedback to tweak that. That's kind of more feedback. Coaching, I think, is all encompassing in terms of the individual, which is a little bit
Yeah.
different than feedback, which can be very specific on a tactical outcome.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then as coaching, do you as a leader need to get training for coaching? Are there, for example, a lot of leaders who are listening and watching to this are probably thinking, well, how do I learn to coach my people in the right way?
Yeah, I think you do. Some people are naturals, but not everybody. I think some people just naturally are drawn to coaching and enjoy coaching and recognize the time because it's a time. It takes time to coach. So I think that's some people just know how to do it. Generally, though, no. I think that there's we and even at Microsoft we sort of have a leadership philosophy of model, coach, care, and coaching is there are classes on exactly how to do it. What's the right framework in which to do it? What's the experience you want the person to have? Absolutely. There's online classes. I'm sure other people's companies give classes too. I don't think people should expect that they should know how to do that super well. I always think learning or taking an experience that will give you another point of view on how to do it is a good thing. It's a skill that takes time and energy and investment. So yeah, and like anything that takes time, energy, and investment, I think it's something you can learn for sure.
Who coaches the coach? Who coaches you?
Yeah, I think, look, I actually love coaching from my team. So my boss, of course, coaches me, but I love coaching from peers. I love coaching from my team. I love coaching from customers. I love coaching kind of 360. So for me, I think about it in the context. I just had a conversation before this where I was talking to, it was actually an individual contributor here at Microsoft. And I do just mentor sessions. And I said, I'd love you to coach me. So you've seen me in different environments. You've seen me in different experiences. I'd love you to give me some coaching as an employee of Microsoft in my organization. What would you want from me? How could you coach me to be a better leader? How could you coach me to show up differently if you think I should be showing up differently? So when you can get somebody to actually really honestly give you that level of coaching, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So I personally love it from all sides. Some of my peers are some of our we are kind of collective coaches together. So we see each other in environments and we often coach each other, which I think is pretty awesome.
Does Satya Nadella give you coaching?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Is he a good coach?
He's a great coach. He's super curious. He's obviously brilliant. and he's interested. So I think that's part of what coaching is about. Like you have to be curious, you have to be interested, and you have to have a point of view. And I think that's Satya to a T.
Do you want to learn how to create an amazing corporate culture while avoiding the pitfalls that make for a toxic one? If so, I created a brand new 8-part training video series just for you. In total, it's around 30 minutes in length, and you can get it right now by going to helpmyculture.com. Go there right now before this training series disappears forever. Again, that is helpmyculture.com, and get access to this free 8-part training series on how to create an amazing corporate culture. What about the balance between strengths and weaknesses? There's been a lot of debate on this, right? Do you try to focus on improving somebody's weaknesses, or do you focus on somebody's strengths? Do you do both? What is the right approach there?
I don't know what the right approach is. I'll tell you what mine is. I think about both because I think people's strengths, and like you said, there's a million different perspectives on this. People's strengths are like their superpowers.
Yeah.
So if they can really harness that superpower, that is what really can elevate them to a different level. So I love zeroing in on people's superpowers and telling them, this is what I see as your superpower, as your true strength. Like, continue to harness it, continue to grow it, to continue to develop it. So I think that's a great way to coach people. And then you also say, depending on what the person's trying to do or where they want to go in their career, where are some areas that you potentially have some opportunities to work on? Let's talk about those too, because if you want to be super well-rounded in your business, you need to have all of that. So I whether that's, the right answer, it's my answer. I actually really think it takes both. To be a really good coach, I think you got to do both.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. I think there's a little bit of a blending of both that kind of needs to go into it. We live in a world now that's changing so quickly.
Yeah.
How do you even coach in a world that is changing so quickly? And maybe coaching is even more important in today's environment, because it does feel like things are changing so quickly. And in fact, even recently, you probably even saw this, right? How many people came out and signed against slowing down AI because it's moving just so quickly.
Yeah.
Like, it just seems like we're on this treadmill of change, and humans are just not able to keep pace. So how do you coach in that kind of an environment that's moving so quickly?
I think coaching for me often is back to the basics. So I think a lot of what we coach around are also behaviors, are also ways people show up, the way people think about work. So I think a lot of that, although the world is changing fast, a lot of the basics don't change. And so I try to ground people in sort of what is always true, or what is always important. And that is always the way that you collaborate. That's a great example for us. So, like, especially in a company like Microsoft, that is such an important skill. It doesn't matter. Actually, it's most important as things move quickly, but it's a skill that exists and is needed in every scenario. So I think I try to filter out too much of the noise and try to center in on the things that are really important for that person in whatever success they're trying to accomplish, or we're collectively trying to accomplish for them. So I see as the change sort of slots in, but I don't think it necessarily changes the basics of what you want or you're trying to do with people. Now, there's always technical aptitude and capability and things like that are both a combination of skilling, which is different than coaching. And people can keep working on that, and that's great. But there's still the aspect of coaching and development that I think is deeply critical, regardless of how fast things are changing.
It's interesting that you mentioned collaboration, because as you know, there's been this big duel between in the office versus virtual, and some companies are like, we've had enough, you're coming back in, we need to collaborate. And even recently, over the past few weeks, just so many big companies are announcing that. And then you made me think of, I can't remember, I think it was Microsoft, and I think it was Satya Nadella, and I think this was at some point last year. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but he said something along the lines of, working in a virtual world has been great as far as productivity, but it has hurt innovation because we miss out on that collaboration piece. So where do you stand on that? Like, for me personally, I think there's still a lot of value for in-person work.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big difference between being productive and checking things off a to-do list versus being able to think strategically and
Mhm.
creatively and being able to create leadership presence and growth and development. Like those are
Mhm.
very different things.
Yeah.
And it's true that a lot of people can work from home. Like for
Sure.
me during the pandemic, I was giving a lot of speeches and the question became,
Mhm.
well, can you give a keynote from home? Yeah, I can, but
Sure.
is it as impactful and as powerful staring at a screen versus being on a stage and
Yeah.
talking to people afterwards and sharing ideas, right? You give a keynote virtually and then you're done and it's like,
Right.
boop, you click
You're
the
like,
button and it's
"Did they
like,
like it?"
there's
Yeah.
nothing.
Right.
But in
Right, right.
person, it's, oh, thank you. You know, you talk to a
Yeah,
lot of people, you meet people, you grab, like it's different and you get
it is.
different things from that.
It is.
So where do you stand on that collaboration, virtual, hybrid world debate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in hybrid, and I think hybrid is here to stay. And I
Yeah.
think some things require in person and some things do not. So I think for us, and we're a great, Microsoft's a great example of this. I mean, we are hybrid. You know, we absolutely have remote and in person, and we think about it in the context of what you're trying to do. So
Mm.
to your point, innovation, strategy, work that is kind of deep and requires thought and energy and that connectedness in person. There's a lot of stuff that you can do that doesn't require you to be in person. So I think we're learning, and I think we're all going to learn through this.
Yeah.
I think a hard stance on one or the other is alienating to employees. My personal opinion. I think giving employees that opportunity to help decide what requires in person and what doesn't, I think is really, really valuable. So people crave connection, we know that, and I think there's that opportunity to create those connections and in-person experiences, but doesn't mean you have to do it every single day.
Yeah.
So I think that balance, if we can all collectively find that right balance, and it'll take us, and it might be different for people, but I think it's a super opportunity for us to continue to let people think about how that work can show up and the right way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think hybrid, and to your point, I think sometimes when people hear hybrid, they mistake hybrid for virtual, but
Right.
they forget that hybrid doesn't mean just virtual. It means
That's
there's a
right.
blending of both,
Right.
which
Yep.
is ultimately, I think, to your point, the best scenario, right? You come in when you need to, when things are relevant, when not, you have a bunch
Yeah.
of meetings, you need to do them from home, totally fine.
Right,
So I
and we
definitely,
see that with our customers too, actually.
yeah,
It's interesting. So you see where your customers are deciding, these are the types of meetings I wanna have in person versus these are the types of meetings that I'm happy to have and actually would rather have virtually, and that's actually, it's kinda neat. It's been a neat experience sort of, figuring out how different organizations work and what they expect.
yeah, and I guess kind of building on that point, you mentioned learning and trying to figure things out. When you were presented with COVID, and you were probably presented with a lot of challenges over the past few years that maybe there was no playbook for, things that you
Yeah.
hadn't encountered. You as a leader, when you are confronted with something that you've never seen before or never done before, do you personally have a certain way that you like to approach uncertainty and to try to come up with solutions and ideas?
Yeah, I think for me, I am back to the vulnerability point. I think I'm the first person to say, like, I don't have the answer. So we need some brain power, to kind of come
Yeah.
together and start thinking about this. So I actually, it's been I think the last 2.5 years, whatever, 2.5, 3 years of my career have been the most interesting and the most fulfilling I've ever had, and I
Mm.
think it's because I feel so much more comfortable just saying that. Just saying, I don't know. Like, I know you're all looking at me because you think I should know. I don't know. So, like, how about we all kind of get in this thing together and start to figure out what the right answer is? And like watching what Microsoft did during the first minute that everybody, kind of everything shut down. And, we did stand ups every day. And it was incredible to watch. Like, these brilliant people come together and just and it was all virtual, spitballing ideas and saying, okay, what about this? And could we do that? And anybody have any ideas here? Like, and it just, I don't know, it felt very fulfilling in a lot of ways where you thought, like, you don't have to be the one that has all the answers. And I think people actually appreciate that you're honest about the fact that you don't know. So
Mm.
I approach it with the standpoint of, and this is just a personal thing for me, I tend to be a glasses half full person. So I will look for possibility in uncertainty. That's just sort of how I'm wired. So I will always think, okay, we don't know what's going on. This is super uncertain. It feels really, really uncomfortable. but there is possibility here and we will find a way. And so collectively, let's think about it. Like, what's it going to be? And we ran all sorts of kind of groups of people just off thinking about, okay, what if we did this way? And what do our customers need right now? And so I think that's how I think about it, is just, there's possibility and uncertainty. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I don't know, and go rally the smartest people you got around you, because they're usually the ones that have the answers anyway. So I'm not the kind of person that shuts myself in a room, like thinking I can come up with the answers. That's not me.
But the culture also, I think needs to foster that, right? So if you look at, like, for example, a lot of people cite the case study of Microsoft under Steve Ballmer versus Microsoft under
Yes.
Satya Nadella,
Yeah.
and kind of the very different environment that it created.
Absolutely.
And so, and you obviously, you weren't there under Ballmer, but a lot of people would say that, if it was under Steve Ballmer's reign, and if you were to be vulnerable and ask for help, you'd get a chair thrown at your head or something, right, to be extreme. But like the leaders matter so much when it comes to creating that corporate culture. And I've talked to a couple employees over the years who are visibly, like it's palpable, the difference in culture between someone like a Steve Ballmer versus a Satya Nadella. And so I guess the question then becomes, how do you make sure that you have that right culture that supports that openness? Because, maybe not every leader is comfortable with something like that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great question. And I think part of it is having frameworks, and like we talked about earlier with kind of this model coach care framework. That's actually really grounding for the company. So when you think about the culture collectively, all the way through, are you modeling the behaviors you want to see? Are you coaching people through the things that are hard, whatever it might be? And do you care? Like, I think care is the part that is makes all of it easier. Like, if you can center people around kind of the caring aspect of it, it sort of shifts people's mindset. But it's work. Culture is work. And I think that you can't just land a framework and be like, yay, here we go. I think you have to model the behavior over and over again. You have to put yourself in super uncomfortable positions so people will see that you're actually walking the walk. So you step into something and admit in front of 3,000 people, that you're conflicted on what to do, or you got something wrong. Like I do that. I step into it, and then it's amazing. You'll get like 20 notes from people who you don't know, who have just said, you've changed my outlook because I saw you do it. And I know it took a lot of risk to say that on that call. So I think it's constant. You've got to keep reinforcing the culture. You got to keep modeling behavior, and leaders matter tremendously. So if you're not seeing it in your leaders, you've got to ask the question, why not? So why don't they feel safe? And you got to dig into it. And we do a lot of culture conversations and roundtables and things like that to really get a pulse on, are we just talking about it, but people aren't really absorbing it, or are we really letting it happen? And we'll always have work to do. I mean, there are just some people who are never going to feel comfortable being vulnerable. That's the reality of some personalities, right? So I think that's okay too. Everybody's got to be who they are. I think the authenticity piece is the most important of every aspect of everything. But I think it's just modeling what you hope for, and then reinforcing.
You mentioned being uncomfortable a few times.
Yeah.
And quite a few leaders that I've talked to on this podcast over the years have said that one of the reasons why they became successful is because they keep embracing the uncomfortable and doing things that nobody else wants to do. Can you share a time, or does a story come to mind where you had to either take on a project or do something that made you feel really, really uncomfortable?
Yeah. So it's funny, the story I was mentioning, and this goes back a ways, when I was probably the first big thing I did that I thought, should I have done that? So when I was at Standard Register, we were a geo-based company, and I felt so strongly that we should show up to our customer in the industries that they serve. And I happened to be covering an area where I had two leaders in New York, and they were just covering geos. And I thought, like, this one knows a lot about financial services, and this one knows a lot about healthcare. I'm going to break this thing up, and I'm going to go into a vertical structure. And it was like mid-year. And I remember calling my boss and saying, I want to do this. And of course, he asked all the right questions. He ran through the plan, everything else. And he said, okay. He goes, it's on you. So if it fails, it's on you. And I remember being like, oh, wait, and I thought, no, I'm going for it. But I felt sort of sick, honestly. I was like, should I have done this? Like, do I really believe in it? Am I wrong? I might be wrong. Like, this might fail. And we went for it. And it was like so freeing. I think it was one of those things where you trust your gut and you do the research. It's not just gut. You run through the data, you do your research, you make sure you have a clear plan. But mostly strategies, you got to execute the strategy. So like the strategies are never going to be perfect, but if you can execute, I think you can overcome a lot of things. So that was one very clear example that will stick with me forever. And I'm grateful for him. I'm grateful that he let me take that risk.
But what if you had failed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's others that I have. I mean, there's others where I've just said, what if we organize in a certain way and we think we can be better and it doesn't work? You just say, that was wrong. Like that didn't work. For sure. Yeah. I'm a big believer in admitting that you did something wrong and just said, because people will be like, well, you thought blah, blah, blah. And I'll say I did. And I was wrong. Like it was wrong. So we got to fix it. Like made a mistake. Here's why I did what I did. I learned from it and we got to keep going. So I guess I've been lucky that I've been in environments that allow that. Like, and not all environments do, and I know that. Not all environments do. I think I'm sort of probably drawn to work at places that I feel like I can be my best, and that do give me some space to do those types of things.
Yeah, it sounds like failure is not always a bad thing.
No, I
And
think it's the biggest learning you'll ever get.
yeah,
I
yeah, and
really
I guess
do.
it's this culture of perfection that a lot of, well, actually, I don't know how many organizations have it, but I think quite a few of them have it where, you don't admit to a mistake, don't ask for help, don't share any failures. People are going to think you're weak, and it's that usually never ends well for anybody.
It's just ends all it ends up doing is hiding a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. That just creates an environment where things are hidden and held back. And that's a shame because that's just wasted opportunity.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, before we jump into the last 15 minutes or so to talk
Yeah.
about authentic leadership, I thought we could just do one more question, and that is really
Sure.
just getting a sense of what your day looks like and how do you structure it. So obviously you're running a $67 billion business. Is there a way that you structure or plan your day to be most effective and productive?
I try. Again, I'm very much a work in progress on this one. I try incredibly hard to block my mornings until 10 a.m.
Okay.
And given Microsoft is a West Coast company, so I work late, but I try to say I need to do my own work until 10. Like, so, and that might include personal things. I want to work out. I want to make sure that I'm prepared for the day. I've done all my preps, for whatever's coming in that day. That this does not always work, but this is what I shoot for. My goal is to say, I don't want a scheduled call on my calendar until 10. So if I can make that work, then I feel really prepared for the day. And I can tell the difference, honestly, when it's like, oh, shoot, like that day I had something started at 8:30. It throws me off a little. Like I can tell the difference when
Yeah.
I'm not as kind of organized and planned and kind of have my day set. So I normally, it changes whether you're traveling or not traveling. So, traveling sort of my mindset on when I'm in the field or I'm traveling is like your day is just it's gone. Like assume it's gone from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep. Packed with seeing customers, seeing employees, etc. And I'm a big believer. Everywhere I go, I see customers and I see employees. I always want to spend time with our employees and I always want to spend time with our customers. I think that's incredibly important. If I'm in office, for an example, I make sure that I always have customers on my calendar every week. I feel really strongly about staying connected to what's happening in our market. So there'll be periods of time where I might see 5 to 7 customers a week virtually if I'm
Wow.
in office. There's always internal things going on. So I try to block stacks of time where I'm seeing customers and then when I'm doing things internally. I also try really hard to follow the rule of not 30-minute meetings, 20 or 25, not hour long, 45.
Hmm.
You'd be surprised how much that helps. So if you can just create a little more space in your calendar to just stand up and step outside. So one thing I've been trying to do also is, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Like if I can literally just stand outside for 5 minutes, it's amazing what air and sun can do for you. So
That's a pretty good leadership hack. I like that.
yeah, just if it's just 5 minutes, and we were talking before we started recording. We both have dogs, so if I can even just pop the dog out for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I can feel it like sort of
Yeah.
refueling me, the sun, the air, all those types of things. So that's one I try to do all the time. And I'm a pretty big advocate of getting workouts in. So so that's why I shoot for the mornings. Sometimes I have to do it at night if I can't get it in. But that's sort of how I do it. So I think about it in the context of personal, like what do I need to be successful in my day? And I think that's really important. And if there's anything I hope people listen to, you got to make space for yourself. Like you have to, whether it's getting air, whether it's hopping on a bike, whether it's breathing, meditation, whatever it is, like create that space for yourself, because it's hard to do all the rest of it if you're not feeling your own energy. And I think that's deeply important. So my days can, as you can imagine, can get crazy sometimes, but generally I try to keep control of them. I have an amazing team. So I feel like my admin, Jen, I truly believe she looks out for my life and my well-being. So she's like manages things exceptionally well to try to make sure that I find that space where I can. She's amazing.
Yeah, I have a similar practice where I also try not to do meetings or anything before 10 because I take the kids to school and then I like to work out for the first hour and a half, 2 hours of every morning. Because if I don't, I'm the same as you. I feel like it disrupts my day and I just don't feel I mean, you get the endorphins, you feel good after you exercise in the morning, eat a healthy breakfast, and then you kind of start your day. And without that, it feels off. I know exactly what you mean.
It does. Yeah. It just feels off. Yep.
Very weird. So the last few minutes, I wanted to talk about something I know that you're a big proponent of, and that's this idea of authentic leadership. And we could look at specifically what that means, how to do it, if it backfires, anything of that nature. So for you, what does authentic leadership actually mean? My conversation with Deb Cupp continues for subscribers of the podcast, either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If you subscribe, you're going to get a bonus episode right now where Deb talks about authentic leadership. And we break this down specifically into what authentic leadership actually means, how do you do it, what happens when it backfires. We also talk a little bit about this theme of leading through change and how to create a safe culture where you can actually be authentic, and how do you talk about some of the difficult and tough topics that are so prevalent inside of organizations today. Again, that's only available for premium subscribers of the show. Again, it's available on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And when you subscribe, you're going to get a bonus episode every single week from one of my amazing guests. And most importantly, it's what helps support the show so that I can bring in more amazing guests like Deb. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you next week.